As a joke, the billionaire asks Black Waitress for financial advice, but her opening remarks leave him dumbfounded. "How about giving me some financial advice along with that water?" inquired Marcus Reynolds, laughing at his own joke and not even bothering to look up from his phone. He was accustomed to the Chateau Lauren restaurant in the center of Manhattan, which was renowned for serving only New York's finest. Chloe Williams paused, the crystal water pitcher hanging in midair, being treated like financial royalty. She had worked at this opulent business for hundreds of haughty patrons at the age of 28. However, there was something about the man's condescending tone that really got to me. It went beyond simple rudeness. It was the kind of nonchalant disdain reserved for her kind of person by people like him. "Actually," Chloe said, her dark eyes flashing with unanticipated ferocity as her voice remained polite, "I would put 40% of my money into sustainable energy-focused emerging market ETFs and 25% into medical, 10% in agricultural commodities as a hedge against inflation, 20% in commercial real estate funds in secondary metropolitan areas, 5% liquid for arbitrage opportunities, and technology stocks that are currently undervalued by the market." The ensuing hush was overwhelming. At last, Marcus looked up, his patronizing grin frozen on his face as he took in what he had just heard. This wasn't just any response. The financial analysis was provided at the institutional level with the accuracy of someone she has extensive knowledge of international marketplaces. He murmured, "Sorry, what did you say?" Chloe poured the water with smooth motions as if she hadn't, now focusing entirely on the woman he had just moments before thought of as merely decor. Just shown to be as knowledgeable about finance as Wall Street analysts. "You want guidance on investments?" "I just responded to your query." The alternative executives at the table ceased talking as everyone's attention was drawn to what was happening. Reynolds' investments partner Jonathan Carter cleared his throat uneasily. "Marcus, it was not common for Reynolds to be confronted, much less by a waitress. Where precisely did you learn about emerging markets?" Marcus inquired, his tone now filled with a mixture of sincere interest and incredulity. Chloe grinned. However, Marcus felt an odd shudder run down his spine because of something hidden behind that smile. You'd be shocked at what someone might discover if they don't undervalue the intelligence of others. It appeared as though everyone in the restaurant had paused to observe. In the middle of serving, waiters froze. Clients whispered to one another. While the maitre anxiously observed from the doorway. Nobody had ever witnessed Marcus Reynolds so humiliated, and by someone he had attempted to degrade. For an instant, when Marcus observed her with a gaze that was a mix of bewilderment, hesitant respect, and something that looked perilously close to fascination as she moved to service another table. This woman had a quality that didn't match the character she was playing, as though she were concealing things that no one in that diner could possibly know. Chloe kept up her flawless professional facade while everyone else was still absorbing what had transpired. However, there was a calmness in her eyes that can only be seen in people who have survived much worse hardships and survived to tell the story. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this tale of brains triumphing over prejudice. Because what follows will demonstrate that the most expensive error someone can make is to underestimate the proper people. Marcus Reynolds did something that was uncommon in his affluent existence during the course of the following 15 minutes. He made a payment focus on someone he felt was beneath him. Every step Chloe took in the restaurant was scrutinized with the ferocity of a predator examining its victim, attempting to figure out how a mere waitress had been able to express an investing approach that was on par with the reports of his own company's leading analysts. Find out everything there is to know about this woman, including her full name, background, school, and co-workers, Jonathan muttered to his companion. Even the brand of toothpaste she uses is something I'd like to know. Jonathan Carter gave a tense nod. After 10 years of knowing Marcus, he was aware that when his insatiable curiosity was sparked by something, and he wouldn't stop until he had all the answers. Do you believe she is attempting to infiltrate us as a corporate spy? Marcus shook his head as he observed Chloe serving a table of Japanese businessmen with the same professional speed. Before taking their orders, they had a quick conversation in fluent Japanese. No, it's a different, more risky. Marcus was unable to acknowledge that he might have misjudged someone. His $4. A $2 billion fortune had been created specifically on his capacity to spot openings and hidden brilliance that others missed. At his favorite restaurant, a black waitress had shown institutional-level financial expertise, which defied his whole ideology regarding intellectual and social hierarchies. Marcus was prepared with his verbal weapons when Chloe came back to see if they needed anything more. So Chloe, he remarked, exaggeratedly deliberate, she read her name tag. I imagine you studied at Harvard or Stanford to gain all this knowledge about emerging markets, right? Chloe laughed. However, Marcus felt uneasy because of the sharpness of that smile. In fact, I had learned a lot from seeing people like you make bad choices based more on conceit than on facts. The remark was like a sword cutting through the air. Marcus felt the blood rush to his cheeks as Jonathan choked on his alcohol. Nobody ever spoke to him in that manner, especially not someone who was there to assist him. Listen to this. Marcus leaned forward and spoke in a low, menacing voice. I have been working, but I'm not sure what game you're playing. For 15 years in this city. Everyone who is important in the financial world is someone I know. I would know if you were someone important. Chloe cocked her head slightly as though carefully weighing his statements in a methodical manner. The intriguing thing about those in positions of authority, she replied coolly, is the way you mistake competence for visibility. You believe that someone can't be relevant if you don't know them. Marcus experienced a growing sense of rage that he was unable to identify as fear. Are you attempting to impart humility to me? A waiter. As she carefully cleared the empty plates, Chloe answered, I'm just observing behavioral patterns. It's amazing how certain people react differently when their presumptions are questioned. Marcus took out his cell phone and called a number he knew as she turned to go once more. It's me, Thompson. I require that you look into someone for me. Chloe Williams is her name. She is employed at Chattel Lauren. Everything is what I want. Instructive, work, finances, and any criminal past. Because yesterday is when I want it. Marcus was unaware that Chloe had previously been employed by Goldman Sachs as a senior quantitative analyst. Before her life collapsed, she lived for 5 years. That before being wrongly accused of insider trading by her own supervisor, a white man who had stolen her job and wanted a scapegoat, she had created trading algorithms that produced over $200 million in profits. The SEC started looking into it. There was never a conviction on the charge. It was sufficient to ruin her reputation on Wall Street even though there was no proof because she was innocent. She had spent all of her cash on attorneys attempting to clean her name, and no respectable employer would hire her following the controversy. The brief position as a waiter served as a means of subsistence while she rebuilt her life away from the financial limelight. However, Marcus Reynolds was unaware that the woman serving him had previously overseen client portfolios. With wealth that surpasses his own, he was unaware that she studied Asian markets as a pastime, that she still had contacts in boutique hedge funds, and that her investment recommendations were derived from early morning analysis utilizing data she gathered from sources he never would have imagined. While Marcus planned to look into her, Chloe surreptitiously watched his table, noticing how he makes uncomfortable movements, how Jonathan always agrees with him, and how they both treat staff members with casual disdain. More significantly, she had overheard brief excerpts of their discussions regarding mergers and acquisitions, information that, in the proper hands, might be enormously lucrative. With trepidation, Mr. Reynolds remarked the Metrodie approaching the table. Since Chloe is new here, it's possible that she didn't comprehend the correct procedures for serving clients of your caliber. Marcus dismissively waved, "Don't worry, Pierre. Actually, I'm finding her educational." Pierre appeared perplexed, but Marcus went back to Chloe, who was chatting with another waiter next to the bar. There was something about her posture, the way she carried her head, that implied confidence. She nodded respectfully before backing away. That extended well beyond her present position. Every new humiliation Marcus attempted to inflict just made her more resilient in a way he was unable to see, driven by the exact wrong he stood for. That haughty billionaire was unaware that every patronizing remark and disdainful glance was penning his own death sentence at the hands of someone who had mastered the art of using underestimation as a deadly weapon. 3 days following the encounter at Chateau Lauren, Marcus Reynolds was holding a report that left him more perplexed than enlightened. Chloe Williams, a 28-year-old with no criminal history and a degree on paper, she should be precisely what she seemed to be, a regular waitress struggling to make ends meet in New York, with a degree in economics from a subpar community college and no prior experience in the financial industry. He whispered to Jonathan Carter, who was perusing the same documents in his office on the 47th floor of Reynolds Tower, "This doesn't make sense. No one gains that level of financial expertise by studying at night." Jonathan uncomfortably adjusted his glasses. At a university that doesn't even offer an MBA program. Perhaps she was lying about her educational background, or is she using a phony identity? Marcus shook his head. Thompson even looked up her birth certificate. Although Chloe Williams is real, it seems like her life only started 5 years ago. There was hardly anything before then. Marcus was unaware that 2 blocks away, Chloe was sitting in a little cafe on the Lower East Side, her fingers flying over the keyboard of an outdated laptop. Comprehensive details regarding Reynolds' assets appeared on the screen, including financial records, organizational structure, ongoing legal actions, and much more. Intriguing. trading patterns that raised suspicions that insider knowledge was being routinely abused. "Have you noticed anything intriguing?" asked a familiar Leo. Zhang sat down across from Chloe, who grinned without looking back and said, "Hey, Leo." Punctual as always. She was a young Asian American, a former co-worker at Goldman Sachs, and one of the only people who never doubted her ability to traverse the perilous waters of Wall Street. Her innocence. He had quietly left the traditional business to become an independent consultant. "Reynolds is looking into you," Leo stated frankly as he slipped a brown envelope across the table. Chloe opened the packet and discovered, "My contacts say he's obsessive." He hired Thompson and Associates, the same guys firms use for due diligence investigations, copies of records outlining precisely what Marcus had learned, or rather, what he hadn't learned, about her. Leah said, "Perfect. He's seeing exactly what I want him to see." Eyebrow. "You had this plan from the start?" "Well, not quite." Chloe's expression darkened as she shut off her laptop. "However, I saw an opportunity when he made fun of me at that meal. Marcus Reynolds and other men have a huge blind spot. They find it hard to believe that someone they view as inferior may be more intelligent than them." Marcus stepped up his personal attack against Chloe over the course of the following few days. He started going to Chattel Lauren on a daily basis, asking for a table in her section in a fairly casual manner. Market-related queries that a waitress shouldn't be aware of. His attempts to catch her in a contradiction were more blatant and vicious. He said, "So, Chloe," one Thursday, she was serving a nearby table when she was interrupted. "I read today that the Asian currency market is unstable. What's your take on the impact on commodities?" Pausing, Chloe pretended to think carefully about the subject as if she were attempting to make an impression. "In my opinion, arbitrage possibilities are being created in the rare metals market due to the volatility of the yuan, especially considering the recently signed trade accords with Vietnam." Marcus grinned mercilessly. "A fascinating theory. Unfortunately, such agreements were suspended by Vietnam 2 weeks ago. I assume you don't adhere to the financial news as closely as you would like us to think." Marcus intended for the remark to publicly embarrass her, and it did just that. Other patrons turned to face them. Some of them were discussing the waitress in whispers, believing her to be an expert in finance. Seemingly uncomfortable, Chloe lowered her gaze, whispered an apology, and hurried off. Marcus reclined on his seat. Content. Jonathan, who had seen the whole thing, appeared uneasy. Marcus said icily, "That was a little harsh, don't you think?" "It was necessary. It's time for people like her to learn to keep to themselves." Marcus was unaware that Chloe had purposefully sent a false response to see how far he would go to publicly embarrass her. He was mentally cataloging every act of abuse and every attempt to denigrate her as proof of his nature. More significantly, she was able to study his habits because of his frequent visits to the restaurant. Snippets of phone calls may be heard over here, along with things that a man used to being served would never think anybody would notice, such as the fact that he consistently left his cell phone face up on the table throughout crucial calls, or that he talked about private business issues while presuming the assistant was invisible and deaf. Chloe once overheard Marcus discuss a unique proposal that involved a hostile takeover of a medical technology company. Business. Although the information was hazy, it was sufficient for her to begin making connections with questionable changes in that company's shares during the past few weeks. "He's setting up something big," she said to Leo in a different private meeting. "And based on the trading pattern I've identified, there are at least 6 instances of possible insider trading over the past 2 years." Leo exclaimed softly. "Those are serious accusations, Chloe. We need solid evidence." "I'll get it," she replied, her eyes gleaming with the tenacity Leo had seen in the past. "Reynolds believes he is hunting, but in reality, he is the victim. He gives me exactly what I need to destroy him every time he attempts to make me feel inferior or acts haughtily." Marcus persisted in his shallow. Chloe conducted a thorough study into an intriguing waitress in order to create a dossier that would not only definitively clear her name but also reveal a network of corruption that went well beyond Reynolds' interests. Despite the predator's seeming humiliation, a silent force was getting ready to transform him into prey in a way he could never have predicted. 3 weeks after the initial encounter at Chateau Lorraine, on a Thursday, the trap closed. Marcus Reynolds was standing in the final details of the aggressive purchase of the medical technology company, which would be the transaction of the century for Reynolds Investments, were presented in a conference room full of excited investors. Marcus said, "Gentlemen," pointing to the screen's charts. "Biotech Solutions is substantially undervalued, according to our analysis. With our $2 deal, $8 billion, we will be in total control of a business that is easily worth double that sum." The meeting's Asian investors appeared impressed. The large sums they were willing to invest through Reynolds Investments were justified by this particular opportunity. At that moment, the room's door suddenly opened. Expecting to see his secretary with a small problem, Marcus appeared annoyed by the interruption. Rather, he witnessed Chloe Williams coolly walking in without her waitress. Uniform, but she looked quite different in a sophisticated corporate outfit. She apologized for interrupting, and the authority in her voice caused everyone in the room to turn. "However, I think there are certain important details you should be aware of before signing any paperwork." Marcus's blood began to chill. "Why on earth are you in this place, safety?" "Mr. Reynolds, don't worry." Grinning, Chloe set a briefcase down on the conference table. "It won't take me long. I only came to dispel some misconceptions regarding my true identity." Jonathan Carter instantly recognized Chloe, muttered something unintelligible, and reached for his cell phone, most likely in an attempt to make a call. Safety. Chloe, however, carried on unperturbed. "My name is Chloe Williams, but I was a senior quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs for 5 years as Chloe Davidson, with a focus on emerging markets and financial fraud detection," she said, opening the folder with composure. "I created trading algorithms that made over $200 million before being wrongly accused of insider trading by my boss, who just so happened to resemble Mr. Reynolds." There was total silence in the room. Sweat started to appear on Marcus's brow. "This is absurd. You work as a waiter. I have investigated you. Christina Matthews was the subject of your investigation." Correcting herself, Chloe took papers out of the briefcase. A persona I created once my Wall Street reputation was ruined. However, I was gathering proof of your unlawful activities while you believed you were pursuing me. Activities. She set many documents down on the table. Permit me to demonstrate to you, investors, that Reynolds Investments has been utilizing insider knowledge on a regular basis. For the previous 2 years, breaking SEC rules at least 15 times. This is ridiculous. Marcus suddenly got to his feet. She is not telling the truth. She works as a waiter and has grandiose delusions. For 3 weeks, a waitress overheard your private phone chats. Chloe gently answered, your habit of leaving your phone face up during crucial calls was observed by a waitress. She switched on a laptop she had taken with her, assuming the assistant was invisible and deaf. Take this tape from the 15th, for instance, where you talked to your accountant about hiding the source of insider information on the merger of Meridian Corporation. The room was filled with Marcus's voice, unmistakable and clear. Make sure they can't link it to our source at the SEC, regardless of how you defend it in the books. If someone discovers that we were aware of the Marcus's face had become an alarming pallor 2 weeks before the merger. Some of the investors had already closed their folders as they nervously exchanged glances. But hold on, Chloe, there's more. Proceeded, keeping her tone professional while she methodically ruined his reputation. These are printouts of correspondence from 6 months ago between Biotech Solutions and Reynolds Investments, well before any this acquisition was justified by independent study. Like an avalanche, the evidence accumulated. Suspicious transactions, call logs, compromised emails, and a blatant pattern of market manipulation that lasted for years. Every document served as a strategically positioned stone to create an unbreakable wall of criminal evidence. How did you gain access to? Marcus started, but stopped when he realized he was implicating himself. You underestimated what a simple waitress was capable of, answered Chloe. Every time you made fun of me in public, every show of conceit, you were providing me with all the information I needed to expose your business. The top Asian investor, Mr. Yamamoto, rose gradually. Is this accurate, Reynolds? Marcus made an effort to gather himself. It's a complex fraud. She's attempting to extort us or something, blackmail? Chloe arched an eyebrow. Mr. Reynolds, I've already given copies of all these records to the FBI, the SEC, and 3 other journalists covering finance. The primary piece will be published tomorrow morning in the Wall Street Journal. The announcement was a bombshell. Jonathan Carter was dropped his cell phone. Clearly worried, investors started whispering among themselves in a variety of languages. Additionally, I decided to notify the board of directors of Biotech Solutions about the unapproved conversations. When they find out that your aggressive takeover is actually a criminal conspiracy, I expect they will be intrigued. Marcus gripped to the table as the situation's truth finally set in. Sinking in. Everything has been ruined by you. I've revealed the reality. Chloe made the correction. The devastation is a result of your own decisions. This is where all crimes, manipulations, and acts of haughtiness are recorded. Marcus's phone started ringing non-stop. Likely reporters, law enforcement, or irate investors who had already received the proof. His reputation, business, and career were all collapsing in real time. However, why? Marcus asked, his voice cracking a little. Why would you do this? Chloe gazed at him with a calmness that was more deadly than rage. Because men like you think they can degrade and ruin others without consequence. Because you thought a black waitress was inferior to you in every manner when you saw her. She finished her task and closed the folder, mostly because someone had to demonstrate that the most expensive error you can do is to undervalue the appropriate individuals. Marcus Reynolds sat there, observing 15 years of financial history as investors hurried out of the room, terminating agreements and severing connections that in just a few minutes, an empire can fall apart. The lady he had attempted to degrade had turned become the mastermind behind his own demise, using each act of disdain as fuel for an exacting and terrible retaliation. Chloe called Leo outside Reynolds' tower. It's finished. The correct people have the evidence. The tale is in the media, and Reynolds recently discovered that Hayes no longer the predator in this circumstance. Now, the true question was not whether Marcus Reynolds would survive the controversy, but rather whether he would realize that his demise had been planned by someone whose intelligence that he was too conceited to see until it was too late. Chloe Williams was seated in her new office on the 35th floor of a midtown building 6 months later. In front of her was a breathtaking panorama of Manhattan. 3 of the biggest investment funds on the East Coast have already become clients of the financial consulting CEO and founder, according to the plaque on the door. She had appeared on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, the analyst who brought down an empire. How a former waitress revealed fraud worth billions of dollars. Every day, job offers arrived. BlackRock, J.P. Morgan, and Goldman Sachs all Desirito employed a woman who had proven to have a special aptitude for spotting complex fraud. Her current partner, Leo Jiang, came into the office with a glass of champagne. Marcus Reynolds' last 15 years in prison plus $2 was the new penalty. $8 billion in penalties and compensation. Chloe looked out the window and quietly nodded. Across town, she was aware that Marcus was most likely in his cell, pondering how his total demise had been planned by a mere waitress. Reynolds' Investments was bankrupt. His investors had deserted him, and his Hamptons estate was being auctioned off to settle legal obligations. Chloe turned to Leo and asked, "You know what's most ironic?" He genuinely thought that degrading others was an indication of superiority. He never realized that every act of disdain was giving him the exact inspiration he needed to destroy himself. It was a delightful irony. Marcus Reynolds, whose career had been built on his ability to underestimate others, lost to someone he deemed unimportant. In addition to being morally reprehensible, his racial and social haughtiness was tactically suicidal. The telephone rang. A Forbes journalist wanted to write about her approach to identifying corporate fraud. Academic institutions were granting her professorships with tenure. Her autobiography was sought after by 3 publishers. The largest financial fraud exposure of the decade was created by Chloe Williams during her 3 weeks as a waitress at Chateau Lauren. Her ability to maintain composure under discriminatory pressure while secretly gathering devastating evidence redefines what it means to turn adversity into strategic advantage, the journalist had wrote. The previous week, Pierre, the Metro D for the restaurant, had called. "We want to name a dish after you, Miss Williams." Maybe justice was served cold, Chloe chuckled at the recollection. Even Chateau Lauren was making money off of her tale, drawing in inquisitive diners who wished to eat at the restaurant where the rich waitress had worked. Marcus Reynolds, on the other hand, was now a total outcast. Former co-workers avoided him by crossing the street. Following a string of offensive messages, his Twitter account was suspended. About unfounded allegations that served to bolster the evidence against him. Half of his remaining assets were taken by his ex-wife, who had filed for divorce. Leo pointed out that the best part is that he made the monster that killed him. Your resolve to expose him became stronger with each public humiliation he inflicted upon you. Chloe grinned as she recalled the precise instance in which Marcus mockingly requested financial guidance. The tale had become legendary in the financial world. He believed he was playing with a defenseless victim, but in fact he was feeding a predator that was far smarter and more patient than he could ever be. Circles. Business schools taught lectures on the Reynolds syndrome, which occurs when CEOs are ignorant to actual risks due to bias and haughtiness. The case became a required study on how Chloe opened the drawer and took out a framed picture of herself serving Marcus at Chateau Lauren, taken by a patron who had shared it on social media. Underestimating people can actually be the most costly thing anybody can do. It served as a daily reminder that true strength doesn't have to yell. Instead, it watches, whispers, and, when the time is right, strikes with surgical precision. Marcus Reynolds attempted to degrade a waitress, but ultimately created his own adversary. Chloe discovered that real retribution isn't making up for the harm done, but rather succeeding in ways your adversaries couldn't have predicted. If this narrative has encouraged you to never undervalue the intelligence superiority over conceit, for more, subscribe to the channel. Narratives that demonstrate that the appropriate people can entirely rewrite at the appropriate moment. The game's rules.